Ready to dive deep? Let's do it. Today, we are exploring the wild woman archetype.
Ooh, that's a good one.
It is a fascinating concept, and you brought some really interesting excerpts from Clarissa Pinkola Estés' book, Women Who Run with the Wolves, to unpack.
Yes. It's a book that's really sparked a lot of conversation.
It has. So for anyone who hasn't encountered this idea before,
Right.
how would you explain this concept of the wild woman?
So, I mean, it might sound a bit mysterious at first, right?
Mhm.
But think of it as this untamed energy almost.
Okay.
This instinct that Estes believes exists within all women.
Interesting. And what I really appreciate about Estes' approach is that she's not just,
Yeah,
writing from this purely academic perspective.
right.
She's a Jungian psychoanalyst, but she's also a poet and a storyteller.
Yes, and that really comes through, doesn't it?
In her writing.
It's this really beautiful blend of like psychological insights and these really captivating stories.
Yeah, and she draws this really striking comparison right at the beginning of the book.
Oh, yeah.
She connects the decline of wilderness, like the actual physical wilderness in the world, to the suppression of the wild woman in society.
It's so brilliant the way she does that
It is?
because it makes you think in a whole new way
Yeah.
about both of those things. And I love how she uses wolves as this really powerful example. I mean, when you think about wolves,
Yeah.
they have this,
We get a bad rap.
they do,
Yeah?
they do,
Yeah.
but they also have these incredible qualities that I think
Right.
we can all learn from.
Yeah. Like, what are some of those qualities that stand out to you?
I mean, their keen senses, their
Mhm.
playfulness,
Mhm.
they're so loyal to their pack.
Yes.
But yeah, they also often get demonized as these dangerous predators.
Right. It's like that duality.
Yeah,
You know?
exactly.
This wildness that can be both beautiful and a little bit frightening.
Right.
And you can see how that same perception has been applied to women throughout history, right?
Absolutely.
This expectation to be tame.
Yes, to fit into these very narrow roles
Yes.
and not step outside the lines too much.
And so what happens when that, that natural instinctive part of ourselves gets pushed down? What are the consequences of suppressing the wild woman?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And Estes suggests it can manifest in a lot of ways.
Okay.
She talks about women feeling drained, creatively blocked, feeling lost, maybe even physically experiencing things like fatigue or anxiety.
I know you highlighted a passage where she uses this phrase, feeling toned symptoms.
Oh, yes.
What does she mean by that?
Yeah, it sounds a little bit technical.
Yeah.
But essentially, she's talking about how these emotional and psychological states can actually show up as physical symptoms.
So there's this mind-body connection.
Absolutely. It's like, when you say you have a gut feeling about something, that's a real thing.
Right.
Our emotions, our thoughts, they impact our physical well-being.
So if we're suppressing our wild woman,
Yeah.
that could actually manifest as
It could definitely manifest.
physical ailments.
Absolutely.
That's really interesting. It makes me think about those times when I've felt creatively stuck.
Yeah.
Or just generally uninspired.
Right.
Maybe that's my wild woman trying to tell me something.
I think Estes would say that's exactly what it is. It's a signal, a wake-up call,
Interesting.
that something's out of balance.
Okay, so we're starting to understand why this archetype is so important.
Yes.
But let's get to the heart of it. What is the wild woman? How does Estes actually define her?
She describes her as the source of feminine strength, intuition, and creativity.
Okay.
It's like, she says, everything a woman needs to be and know.
Wow.
It's this wellspring of wisdom that's inside each of us.
It's like an inner compass.
Yeah, but maybe even more than that.
Okay.
It's not just about direction. It's
Yeah.
about connecting to a deeper sense of who we are, what we're capable of.
I like that.
It's that instinctual knowing that guides us, protects us, fuels our creativity.
So it's not about being aggressive or dominant or anything like that,
Yeah, not at all.
but about tapping into this inner strength and wisdom.
Exactly.
And this is where Estes' storytelling comes into play, right?
Oh, absolutely.
You mentioned that she uses fairy tales and myths to help us understand the wild woman.
Yes.
How does that work?
Well, she believes that stories, especially those that have been passed down through generations, hold a lot of psychological truth. She sees them as medicine for the soul.
So it's not just about reading them for entertainment,
Right.
but for uncovering these hidden meanings.
Exactly. And she has a really unique approach.
Okay?
She digs beneath the surface.
Yeah.
She peels back layers of cultural and religious interpretations that might have been added over time. She's looking for those raw, primal truths that speak to women's power.
So she's almost like deconstructing these fairy tales to
Yes.
reveal their original essence.
Exactly.
That's fascinating. Can you give me an example? Like, how would she approach a classic fairy tale?
Sure.
Like Little Red Riding Hood.
Yeah. So, most people see Little Red Riding Hood as just a cautionary tale.
Right, about stranger danger.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But Estés would look for the deeper symbolism.
Okay.
For instance, Little Red Riding Hood venturing into the woods could represent a young woman stepping into her own power,
Okay.
exploring her independence.
Interesting.
And the wolf could represent those darker shadow aspects of ourselves,
Okay.
our fears, our desires that we need to learn to navigate.
So it's about recognizing those archetypal figures in these stories
Yes.
and understanding how they relate to our own lives.
Exactly.
That makes you think twice about those bedtime stories we heard as children, doesn't it?
It really does.
So we're starting to get a sense of who this wild woman is.
Yeah.
But it's one thing to talk about it theoretically. It's another to actually connect with her in our everyday lives. Does Estés offer any practical guidance on how to do that?
She absolutely does. And this is where it gets really exciting because she gives us specific tools and practices
Ooh,
to help us awaken our own wild woman.
I like it.
And one of the things she emphasizes is embracing creativity in all its forms.
So not just becoming a professional artist,
Right.
but tapping into that creative energy in our everyday lives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She encourages us to engage in what she calls the craft of making.
What does that mean, the craft of making?
It's about working with our hands, creating something tangible, whether it's painting, sculpting, gardening, even cooking.
So it could be a lot of different things.
It can be anything that allows you to really tap into that instinctual creative energy.
It's like that feeling of being totally absorbed in an activity.
Yes.
When you lose track of time.
Yes, you get lost in the flow.
Yeah.
And Estés believes that when we engage in these activities, we're connecting with that primal creativity that the wild woman embodies.
So it's not about creating a masterpiece.
No.
But about the joy of the process itself.
Exactly.
About that.
It's about letting go of perfectionism, allowing yourself to play, to experiment, to get messy.
That takes the pressure off.
It does.
So we've got stories, we've got creative expression. What other tools does Estés offer?
Well, let's talk about that after a quick break.
Welcome back. We're still deep in the world of the wild woman with Clarissa Pinkola Estés, and I'm so curious to hear more about those tools and techniques that you mentioned.
Yeah, those practical ways to bring the wild woman into our lives.
Exactly. Like, how do we actually do that?
So, it's like Estés is handing us this toolbox
Okay.
full of wisdom from these ancient stories and from her own clinical experience as a therapist.
I love that analogy, the toolbox.
Yeah.
So what's in this toolbox? You mentioned creativity last time, but are there other ways to connect with that wild woman energy?
Absolutely. And remember how we talked about Estés using fairy tales and myths as medicine for the soul?
Yes, I do.
Well, each story is like a key that unlocks a different part of ourselves.
Okay, so can you give us an example of how she uses one of these stories to illuminate the wild woman?
There's this one tale from the Inuit tradition that I find really powerful. It's called Skeleton Woman.
Skeleton woman. Okay.
And it's this incredible metaphor for the process of healing and renewal,
Interesting.
especially for women who've been through really difficult experiences.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more about Skeleton Woman.
So the story goes like this. There's this woman who's been so deeply hurt and betrayed that she basically shuts down emotionally.
Okay.
She becomes like a skeleton washed up on the shore, empty and lifeless.
Wow. That's a pretty intense image.
It is.
It makes me think about those times when we feel numb
Yeah.
or disconnected from ourselves.
Exactly. And it's like that feeling of just being totally depleted.
Right.
But here's where the story takes a turn. A fisherman finds her skeleton.
Okay.
And instead of being afraid,
Yeah.
he feels this overwhelming compassion for her. He gently gathers her bones, wraps them in his cloak, and takes her home.
Wow.
And slowly, through his care and tenderness, her flesh and spirit begin to return.
It's like he sees her essence, even in that broken state, and he helps her reclaim her wholeness.
That's a beautiful way to put it, and I think that's the message that Estés wants us to understand, even when we feel like just a collection of dry bones.
Yeah.
Like there's no life left in us.
Right.
There's still hope for healing and renewal.
That's a powerful reminder, I think, for all of us.
Yeah.
That even when we feel lost or broken, that spark within us, that wild woman essence, is still there waiting to be rekindled.
Yes. And it also shows us that love and compassion from others and from ourselves can be that healing force.
So it's not just about reading these stories passively, but about actively engaging with them, letting them speak to us on a deeper level.
Exactly. And that leads us to another important tool in Estés' toolbox, engaging in what she calls the craft of making.
Right. We touched on this earlier, using creativity as a way to connect with the wild woman.
Yes.
What are some specific ways that we can do that?
She really encourages hands-on activities, things that engage all of our senses, not just our minds.
Okay.
It could be painting, sculpting, weaving, gardening, or anything that allows us to create something tangible to work with our hands.
It's like that feeling of being totally absorbed in an activity where you lose track of time. You just get lost in the process.
Exactly. You get lost in the flow. And Estés believes that when we engage in these activities, we tap into that instinctual part of ourselves, that primal creativity that the wild woman embodies.
It's not about creating a masterpiece.
No.
It's about the joy of the process itself.
Exactly. And it's about letting go of perfectionism.
Right.
Allowing ourselves to play, to experiment, to get messy.
Yeah. I love that it makes creating feel so much less intimidating.
Yes, and more accessible to everyone.
So we've got stories, we've got creative expression. What other tools does Estés offer?
One that's so important, especially in our modern world, is reclaiming our intuition. We're often taught to prioritize logic and reason, but Estés encourages us to listen to those inner whispers, those gut feelings that come from a deeper place.
You know, I think a lot of us have had that experience where our intuition was telling us one thing, but our logical mind talked us out of it.
Right.
And then later we realized, oh, I should have listened to that inner voice.
Exactly. It's like a muscle that needs to be strengthened.
Okay.
We've been conditioned to ignore it.
Yeah.
But the more we pay attention to those subtle signals, the stronger our intuition becomes.
So it's not about dismissing logic altogether.
Right.
But about integrating intuition as another source of wisdom and guidance.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we have multiple ways of knowing and understanding the world.
Right.
And sometimes our intuition can guide us towards truths that our logical mind hasn't even considered.
It's like tapping into that ancient wisdom that resides within us.
Yes.
That connection to something larger than ourselves.
And Estés suggests a few practices to help us cultivate that intuition: journaling, working with our dreams, spending time in nature.
Interesting.
These all help us quiet the noise of the outside world and tune into our inner voice.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned nature because Estés draws a lot of inspiration from the animal world, especially wolves. What is it about wolves that she finds so compelling?
You know, wolves embody a lot of the qualities that she associates with the wild woman. Their keen senses, their fierce loyalty, their deep connection to instinct, and their powerful sense of freedom. They move through the world with this primal grace and strength.
And haven't wolves often been misunderstood and demonized?
They have.
Kind of like women who challenge societal expectations.
That's a really insightful connection.
Yeah.
Both wolves and women who embrace their wild woman nature are often seen as a threat, as too powerful, too untamed.
So it's not just about looking inward, but also about finding those reflections of the wild woman in the world around us. We can learn from the wisdom of the natural world from the animals who embody that primal energy.
Exactly. And Estés reminds us that those connections are all around us if we're open to seeing them.
You know, we've covered so much ground already. Stories, creativity, intuition, connecting with nature.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It is, I feel like we're building this incredible map to guide us back to our wild woman selves.
I love that.
But I have a feeling there's even more to explore.
Or there is.
What else can we look forward to uncovering in the next part of our deep dive?
Well, there's one more key element I want to touch on, the power of ritual and how it can help us connect with the wild woman on an even deeper level.
Ooh, okay, ritual.
Yeah.
I like it. Let's talk about that when we come back. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of the wild woman. We've been talking about all these amazing tools and techniques from Clarissa Pinkola Estés, and it's really got me thinking about how we can integrate these ideas into our daily lives. You know, it's one thing to read about it, but it's another to actually put it into practice.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I think makes Estés' work so powerful is that she doesn't sugarcoat things.
Right.
You know, she acknowledges that this journey of reclaiming the wild woman
Yeah.
isn't always easy or comfortable.
Right.
There are challenges along the way, and she doesn't shy away from exploring those.
Yeah, you're right. She talks about those shadow sides of the wild woman, too.
Yes.
The anger, the fierceness.
Yes.
Even the potential for destruction. It's not about
Yeah.
denying those aspects, but
But
about
see it through.
understanding them and learning to channel them in a healthy way.
It's about recognizing that wholeness includes those darker aspects as well.
Right. It's that integration of all parts of ourselves.
Yes, and she uses this great example of the too nice woman.
Oh, yeah.
The woman who's afraid to set boundaries,
Right.
to speak her truth, to stand up for herself.
And what does she say happens when we suppress those
Right.
those natural expressions?
She suggests that when we suppress those natural expressions of anger or assertiveness, they can actually turn inward.
Mm.
And then they lead to feelings of powerlessness or resentment.
So it's not about becoming, aggressive or domineering or anything,
No.
but about finding that balance.
Exactly.
The wild woman is both
Yes.
fierce protector and compassionate nurturer.
Yes. It's about learning to wield our power with wisdom and discernment,
Right.
both for our own well-being and for the good of the world.
It makes me think of that quote by Marianne Williamson.
Oh, yes.
Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure.
That's so good.
And maybe reclaiming the wild woman is about
Yes.
facing that fear and stepping into our full potential.
I love that connection. And Estés really emphasizes that this journey is unique
Okay.
for each woman. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah.
Yeah. She encourages us to trust our own inner guidance and to honor the particular ways in which the wild woman expresses herself in our lives.
So it's not about trying to fit into some predetermined mold,
No.
but about discovering our own individual expression of wildness.
Exactly.
What might that look like in practice?
I mean, it could take so many different forms.
Okay.
For one woman, it might be about embracing her creativity through dance or painting. For another, it might be about speaking up for herself more assertively at work
Right.
or setting clearer boundaries in her relationships. For someone else, it might be about spending more time in nature,
Yeah.
reconnecting with that primal energy.
It's about listening to our own inner whispers and finding those practices that truly resonate with us.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the most empowering messages that Estés offers,
What's that?
is that we have the power to choose how we want to embody the wild woman. We get to define what that looks like for ourselves.
So we've explored these amazing tools for connecting with the wild woman. Stories, creativity, intuition, ritual, connecting with nature as we wrap up this deep dive.
Yeah.
What's the key takeaway you want to leave our listener with?
I want them to remember that the wild woman isn't some mythical figure or distant ideal. She's a living, breathing force within each of us.
I love that.
And the journey back to her is a journey of self-discovery, of healing, of remembering who we truly are.
And it's a journey that's worth taking.
Absolutely.
Even if it's challenging at times.
Even if it's challenging, because when we embrace the wild woman, we tap into this wellspring of strength, creativity, and joy that can transform not only our own lives, but the world around us.
And Estés reminds us that the wildish nature does not require a woman to be a certain color, a certain education, a certain lifestyle, or economic class.
It thrives on self-integrity and fresh sight.
The wild woman belongs to all women.
That's such a powerful message.
That is a beautiful thought to end on.
Yeah.
So as we close out this deep dive, I invite you, dear listener, to ask yourself, what aspects of the wild woman resonate most with you? And how might you start inviting her more fully into your life today?
Maybe it's through those creative practices we discussed. Or maybe it's about setting aside some time for quiet reflection, for listening to your intuition. Maybe it's about connecting with nature or finding your own unique ways to express your wildness.
Whatever path you choose, remember that the wild woman is waiting. And when you embrace her, your life will never be the same.
It's been such a pleasure exploring this with you.
Until next time, keep diving deep and keep exploring those wild landscapes within and all around you.